Did you play with the Allman Brothers?
I did a lot of shows with the Allman Brothers. I never played in the band with the Allman Brothers. As a matter of fact, when they started the band, I was looking for a solo deal for Barry Oakley, for him as a singer-songwriter. And so, coincidentally, I promoted a show that was, it might have been the very first show they ever played together, you know, for actual pay and everything as a band here in Tampa, or actually in St. Petersburg. And I was playing with the Outlaws. Let's see, was that the... No, I'm sorry. I guess I played on that bill with a band I was in called Duck Butter, and the headliners was Cat Mother and the All Night Newsboys for that show. So then I was just doing that as a favor for Barry because he was a friend of mine.
Okay.
So I used to work with the Allman Brothers a lot, but I never actually played with them, no.
What can you tell me about Chuck Berry and you?
Well, you know, I suppose my stories pretty well match up everybody else's who has worked more than once or twice with Chuck Berry. When he's nice, he's really nice, and when he's not, he's quite the jerk. And when he's good, he's really unbelievably good. And when he's not, he just doesn't care. He doesn't bother. So you never know which it's going to be.
So with you, was it mostly nice or not nice?
I'd say probably like a 50-50 thing, you know. I mean, overall, it was a very positive experience just because he's Chuck Berry. But at his best, he's so good and he's so much fun and he's such a good guy that it's just a real pleasure and a, you know, real thrill.
Now, what years would you have played with Chuck Berry?
Probably the first one would have been this rock and roll revival tour that we did that I think would have been maybe in 1970 or 71, something like that. And then probably the last time I ever played with him would have been just maybe a year or two after that, maybe 72 or so, something around that time.
Is there any video that exists with you and Chuck Berry?
Not that I can think of. You know, there are a lot of pictures around and everything, but if I've ever seen any video clips, I don't remember it, and I certainly haven't seen them in a very long time. I don't believe there is anything that I can think of.
So let's say with Chuck Berry, how far would you have played with him, like, you know, doing some tours and stuff?
Well, we did one short tour. The first time that I worked with him, we just were doing... there had only been one rock and roll revival official thing. It was the one that Richard Nader put on at Madison Square Gardens. I think it was the one that Ricky Nelson wrote Garden Party about. And so Richard Nader then decided to package tours like that and make it available to other promoters. So Phil Gernhard did the next shows and you know, came to me and said, who do you think we ought to put together for these things? You know, Richard Nader will get whatever acts we want. So we did Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Bill Haley and the Comets, the Coasters, and Gene Vincent. And the only other person that I wanted on the tour, the short tour, was Screamin' Jay Hawkins.
Right.
And at first they said, okay, well, you know, Screamin' Jay's on the bill too. And then they came back at the end and said, well, no, Screamin' Jay is living 6 months out of the year in Hawaii, and unfortunately he's in Hawaii now and he's not going to come back to do these shows. So everybody else was on that tour.
Now, did you ever appear on an album with Chuck Berry?
No, never recorded anything with him at all.
Just played bass?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How was the crowd in those days for Chuck Berry, you know, since he's the
great.
creator of rock and roll?
Right. You know, sometimes better than others, but he always drew a very large crowd. And the last show that I played with him, as a matter of fact, I just saw a clip on YouTube the other day of Chuck Berry on the Mike Douglas show with John and Yoko co-hosting.
Okay.
And Mike Douglas asked him something along the lines of, did you ever play for a crowd that just won't let you go, that just refuse to let you go? And Chuck Berry leans up and he laughs and he goes, night before last, you know, we played for 2 hours and 15 minutes or 2 hours and something. And that was the show that we had just done the Saturday night before that in Miami. And he was just phenomenal that night. we played for, we came off stage, and I was really beaten. I glanced at my watch, and I thought we had played for an hour and a half. And then somebody said something to Chuck, and he was talking about the time, and I realized, oh, my God, no, we played for almost 2.5 hours, not an hour and a half. But he recited poetry and sang songs I've never heard in my life, and he was down on his knees, yelling and screaming. It was just magnificent. So, yeah, I mean, he's always been capable of doing anything he wants to. It's just that sometimes he wants to and sometimes he doesn't.
And that night he would have done anything the people wanted to.
Oh, yeah. He just was magnificent. It was Chuck Berry, and his opening act was the James Gang that night. And, it was a fine show. It was a very young crowd. It was at the High Life Fronton in Miami, and it was not a real big venue. It probably held, maybe 1,000 or maybe 2,000, probably not more than that. But it wasn't a real big place, But the kids were on their feet and just screaming from beginning to end. It was great.
So another thing too, Ronny, there's not much of recordings that exist of this era with Chuck Berry, like the bootleg concerts and stuff recorded on audio.
Yeah.
There's not much.
Right. He didn't, of the stuff that I've heard, well, he tended to try to, one of the reasons that he started to have promoters get in touch with me to put bands together for him, I think, was because he was comfortable and it was fun. He apparently, as nearly as I could tell, had gotten used to using pickup bands and trying to get them to do nothing but just play the backbeat so that he could just do the whole thing. He didn't want anybody to mess anything up. And so he wasn't, most of the time I get the feeling that he wasn't going out there and bothering to try to really play at all. But if he chose to, and he was in the mood to, he was as capable as he had ever been. He was just magnificent. And I have a feeling he's probably still like that. I don't know. I haven't seen him in years.
Somewhere down the line, did you play with Bo Diddley?
Never did play with Bo Diddley. For that tour, for those few dates, he used a band that he had put together. His niece Cookie was in the band, and I can't remember who the other musicians were, but he carried a band with him for that. He did express interest in producing the band that we were using to back these other people up, a band called Duck Butter. And he was living in Gainesville, Florida, which was pretty near us at the time. But we never got back together with him to follow up on it. And I don't know why. It's just something we never got around to.
And for Canned Heat, what's your participation in that?
Just on a bill with them at Curtis Hickson here in Tampa. And, it was a lot of fun. They were just really nice guys, and, the whole thing was just exactly like those Canned Heat records sound, But very outgoing, friendly, nice people, and it was a lot of fun. But nothing special. We never developed any kind of relationship with them or anything. Played just the one date, and that was it.
Dave Clark 5, what's about that?
Well, that was kind of the height of the whole British invasion, and it was as close as anything came, in Tampa, as far as the whole Beatles thing went. And it was fun, and it was nice, and it was. I think the capacity at that hall, at Curtis Hickson Hall, was 6,000 people, or right around 6,000, and it was packed and sold out, and it was really a lot of fun, and just a very special sort of evening. And I like the Dave Clark 5 stuff. I certainly went through a period where I kind of disdained it and didn't think so highly of it, but as I look back now, I've got quite a warm spot in my heart for that stuff.
And what was your participation in that?
Just on the bill with them again.
Okay.
I think there were, 3 of us bands from around here who did, that kind of garage rock stuff, and we were all on the bill with them. The Romans, which was Tommy Rowe's backup band, and the band that I was in was called the Outsiders, and the other band from here was called the Tropics.
Now, the band that you played with Chuck Berry, was it like a pickup band playing, or was it like really the Chuck Berry band?
The first little tour that we did, it was basically the band that I was playing at the time that was called Duck Butter.
Okay.
But after that, when he started to have promoters get in touch with me to back him up, instead of using the whole band of Duck Butter, I would usually just use myself, a piano player and a drummer, so that we could basically play just what all of his chess hits had been. All of us had grown up playing all those songs, and we knew, we played them just like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what made him happy about it. So it was more or less just a pickup band of musicians that I had worked with regularly for years around here.
And that means more money for Chuck Berry.
No, he didn't care one way or the other.
Okay.
And no, he didn't pay us. The promoter did. His money situation. When I would get a call from the promoter after that, the first tour that I did, typically it would just be, Chuck Berry said to get in touch with you. I'll pay you this amount of money. I'll have a back line there for you. I'll get you tickets to get down here, that sort of thing. But he took whatever money he was going to take, period. So he didn't care one way or the other.
And
I mean, he's always negotiated his deal. I want this much money.
Right.
Here's my contract rider. I have to have a blackface Fender twin reverb amp. It has to be between this year and this year. I want half of my money in advance, and the other half will be given to me in cash before I go on stage. And that's pretty much it. Everything else, he doesn't care one way. I will be on stage for 50 minutes or whatever he puts in there, and that's pretty much it. He doesn't do much, or at least at the time, he didn't do much negotiating about. He didn't care what color the M&Ms were, let's put it that way.
Like the famous Van Halen stories.
Yeah, right.
Van Morrison, what's your work with him?
I only worked with him twice. The first time must have been, I guess, let's see, what year would it have been? 1968 or 69. Brown Eyed Girl was new and it was current. So whenever it was, a top 10 single, it was during that period. And we were playing at the Scene, Steve Paul's Scene in New York, because we were up there to record in a band that I was in called Noah's Ark. So the Candymen were the headliners. They were Roy Orbison's band, but they also had their own career going, and they were sort of the darlings of the hip set in New York at the time. So it was our band, Noah's Ark, the Candymen. Blood, Sweat, and Tears were playing, but they were just a rhythm and blues quartet. There was no singer yet, no horns. It was mostly just Al Cooper playing melodically on piano, backed up with Bobby Colomby and a rhythm section. And Tiny Tim played almost every night, and none of us had ever heard of Tiny Tim, and he had not recorded or anything. And Van Morrison, I didn't recognize the name. I had heard Brown Eyed Girl on the radio, but I was a big Them fan, but I didn't recognize the name. And he was just magnificent. But he, that first night at the Scene, he wanted to fire his band, and we had the same publicist in New York at the time, this guy named Morty Wax, who I understand is still alive and still works in New York. I thought he was about 100 years old then, but apparently he's still alive and still in business. But Van Morrison, through Morty Wax, sent us the word that he wanted us to become his band and wanted us to go to work for him. And he seemed like such a jerk, as good as he was. We did not want to go to work for him. He wanted to fire this great band, though. He got fired himself that night. He complained about the heat and stopped in the middle of a song, and Steve Paul came up and put his arm around him, and the next night he was gone, so Steve Paul got rid of him. And then the next time was, it must have been like 1970 or 71, we played a pop festival thing with him in Miami. It's during the period of time of his band and the street choir, because, it was like 12 or 15 people on stage. And he was just magnificent that night, too. But once again, not the friendliest guy in the world. But, I mean, I never really spent any time with him. I don't know him. I've been around him enough to see that he's not a real warm, friendly fellow.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a huge Van Morrison fan.
So you got to play some bass with Van Morrison for a few...
No, never did. When he wanted us to become his band, as a matter of fact, I can't remember the guys who were in that band at the time. I do remember that his bass player, though, was Danny Armstrong. The Dan Armstrong who made the clear guitars for Ampeg later. And he was just a phenomenal bass player, probably still is for all I know. But Van's band was really great, the band that he wanted us to be replacing. But no, we never worked with him at all. It was just on the bill with him, that's all.
So you never got to replace the band?
No, well, we could have, and we passed on the opportunity.
That is too bad.
It is, a year later I looked back and thought, oh, we should have done that just for the experience. But it was just such an unpleasant thing that I certainly didn't have any second thoughts about it then.
Good subject, the Outlaws. Now you're like the bass player in the original days of the Outlaws.
Well, not exactly the original days. In the days leading right up to them getting their deal with Arista and everything, the way that worked was that I was my record producer, Phil Gernhard, the guy who had produced Stay with Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs, and then Abraham Martin and John with Dion, and Let Your Love Flow with the Bellamy Brothers, and things as bad as Snoopy versus the Red Baron with the Royal Guardsmen. But he was living in Florida, and he had me working for him, promoting concerts and doing other things, and anything to earn my keep. And my real job was supposed to be to bring in acts that we could produce and have big hit records. So I took him the Outlaws, and we took them to Miami and Criteria Studios to record. And we recorded, I think it was 4 songs in one afternoon, and Phil decided that he didn't want to use the stuff. He was going to pass on it. And he did, and Arista and Clive Davis signed them right away, and they went on to have hits. But I had been playing bass with them right up until that time, really just because they wanted to get rid of somebody in the band. So I left the band that we were talking about before, Duck Butter, and went in and started to play with the Outlaws. And I probably only played with them for maybe 6 months or something like that. But it was the transition period where they started to play their own songs and do their own things instead of just being a cover band. So I left to go back to Duck Butter, and they went on and got their deal with Arista and, began to have the radio hits and did okay after that. But they had been around as a very young, very typical bar band, cover band, already for a year or two before I started playing with them.
Would 68 to 69 be the dates you were in the group?
Probably. Yeah, that would probably be just about right.
Was there lots of originality, building up, because they're known for their twin guitars?
Incredible talent in the band. Hughie Thomasson just was a wonderful singer, a magnificent guitar player, and just an all-around colorful character. And he and Frankie O'Keefe, the original bass player, they just had a real partnership in terms of what they did together and what they wrote. And they had a singer for a while named Herbie Pino, who was also a real part of the thing. And the original drummer in the band, Dave Dix, who after that was back and forth in the band, trading places back and forth with Monty Yoho, is just a phenomenal drummer, too. So they had a fantastic band. And they had plenty of great material. I mean, Phil Gernhard and I fought tooth and nail about why he was not going to look for a deal for them with the stuff that we recorded in Miami. It was a disappointment to them and a disappointment to me.
Now, is there anything that exists with you and the Outlaws that are on tape?
I don't know. This is the first time I've never thought about it. Nobody's ever asked me. And Hughie passed away about a year ago. Frankie O'Keefe has been dead for 20 years, and probably the only person who would know might be Dave Dix. And I see Dave every now and then, but we've never talked about it. I'm not really sure. You
should talk to him about it. It'd be a good question to have answered.
Right. Well, they, especially Hughie, sort of mined that whole nostalgia thing for some period of time. He joined Leonard Skinner, or what they call Leonard Skinner now, and he had to do that kind of thing to kind of scratch together everything to make a decent living. But I don't know if there is anything. Dave would probably know, but like I said, I've never talked to him about it. I don't know.
And the thing of today, what does Ronny Elliott do today in music?
Pretty much the same thing I've always done. I never really wanted to do anything, in my name. I was always extremely happy being, a band member. I consider myself a bass player, and it's hard to do that by yourself. But at some point, 15 years ago, I figured out that You can't quit and start over every time somebody has a nervous breakdown or goes away to school or gets married or divorced. And so I started to do things of my own, and that's still what I'm doing. I play about half the time with a band and about half the time solo, and put out records usually about once a year, but it's been a couple of years now since the last thing came out. And I travel when I can, and when there's stuff to work, and I'm always working on new material and doing pretty much the same thing I've always done.
So when are we going to have a new album on the internet?
Well, the hold-up, this is all a touch embarrassing to even talk about, but there's this charity out of Washington, D.C. called Hungry for Music. It's a great organization that they put together money and programs to get musical instruments for kids in ghetto schools and poor areas. And one of the things that they do is that they put together programs to try to focus attention on the charity to make money. The last big project they did, I think it's been about 4 years ago now, but they did a tribute to Peter Case. It was called A Case for Case. And they did a 3-CD set, and John Prine was on it, and James McMurtry, and Chuck Prophet, and a lot of people, and I did a cut on there. Well, now they approached me and have been working on a Ronny Elliott CD, and they want me to, try to help as it goes along, and they want me to put out a compilation CD that comes out at the same time with all the same songs off of my records in the past and everything in the same order of what their thing is. So I'm kind of holding up. I'm writing and working on new material, but this thing, kind of drags on, and I probably won't put something out between now and then. I'll probably do this thing first. So coincidentally, the guy just left my house this morning. He came into town and spent the night here last night. He was passing through this part of Florida because somebody was donating 12 brand new Telecasters to him to give to the program. So it's the first time that I've seen him since this has been going on, but that's the current plan. That's what's going on.
Still sounds good, though.
Yeah, it's great, and the charity itself is a wonderful thing. It's called Hungry for Music. So if you check out hungryformusic.com, you'll see the thing, and they've done great things before. As a matter of fact, the next project I think is a tribute record to Alan Toussaint.
Okay.
So I look forward to that one.
And how long have you been on the internet, Ronny?
Boy,
RonnyElliott.com.
Yeah, I don't know. I would guess 10 years. I don't really know. Time kind of flies, and I don't pay too much attention to any of this. I certainly spend enough time there so that I should be able to give you an exact date, but I can't.
Now, do you spend a lot of time on the internet and interacting with people?
I can't help myself. Yeah, when I hear from people. As a matter of fact, I heard from a guy today who had put a piece of something that I'd written on his Chuck Berry page, and he wrote me and said, "Well, I have put up this, piece of you interviewing a friend of yours about meeting Chuck Berry on my website today, so check it out." And so I hear from these very nice people with things that are kind of oddly fascinating, and I'll probably spend more than a healthy amount of time doing that. Yeah.
Well, tonight you surely put a stamp on music history, and appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
We'll have to do another one in the near future.
I look forward to it. As a matter of fact, let's find some reason that. Well, actually, you get down to Florida, when the winter gets here, and then get me into Nova Scotia though when it's warm enough to walk around and do something. Okay.
We'll not bring you here in the winter time. Probably too cold.
Right. That's fine.
All right, Ronny. You have a great evening.
You too. Thanks very much.
Hey, thank you.
Bye.